Welcome to another episode of Conversations with Annie and Kate. Tonight, our guest is Jane Caro. And hi, Annie, over to you to introduce our guest.
Welcome, Jane. It's a great pleasure to finally meet you, sort of, in real life. I've been, I think, kindly stalking you on Twitter for quite some time now, so it's good to actually get to chat to you in person. We were chatting before Kate hit the record button, and I'm like, Jane doesn't need an intro. Everyone knows Jane. But if we were to introduce you, writer, Walkley nominated.
I won.
So that, of course you did. Yes, you did. Walkley nominated and winner. Do you have an Order of Australia, or is it the
It's AM, so it's a member of the Order of Australia. Yes.
See, I need to know all of these things because I have my citizenship test tomorrow morning. So this is a good reminder.
Don't tell them you've spoken to me. I don't think that will help.
Well, to be fair, if they do a troll through my Twitter feed, I'm pretty confident I'm not getting in. Jane, welcome to our humble little podcast.
My pleasure. Lovely to be here.
Now let's talk about. I've got a drink, so
okay,
I'm drinking some red wine, and it's called Wild and Wilder. It's very nice.
Oh, very good. I am drinking some Applewood gin, but it's the Samphire flavoured one. It's really very, very good. If you haven't tried Applewood gin, it's from Adelaide. It's just incredible. Apple Distillery, big fan. And if they want to send me free bottles, I'm open to it.
Hint. Well, unfortunately, this is an alcohol-free day for me, so I'm not drinking anything.
You're very staunch. Well done.
Don't get that many of them a week. I try to get 2. I don't always manage it, but I'm being strong today.
One day, I hope to be as grown up as you. It's not going to happen, I don't think. So, Jane, we kick off the podcast usually with a couple of some of the questions that when Kate and I were talking at the beginning of pulling the podcast together, these were questions that we wished that we actually got asked, but never do.
Wow.
So my one for you is, what's your favourite comfort food?
Oh, there's so many. That's the trouble. Basically, all food gives me enormous amounts of comfort. But probably it's cheese. It's got to be cheese. I love cheese. I love blue cheese and soft cheese and exotic cheese and smelly cheese. And I don't have to have it with a biscuit. I can just eat it straight from the block.
And is there a cheese that you've met yet that you haven't liked?
Oh yeah, there are some I don't like Danish blue. It's too salty.
Interesting.
But I do like other blues. I find Danish blue, don't like it. So yes, there are some I don't like soapy cheese, that tastes of not very much cheese. But most of them I can find a redeeming feature.
I love it. One of the things that is always a constant in mine, Kate, and with our friends is gin, cheese.
Yeah, cheese it's a meal. You can kid yourself you've only had hardly anything to eat if you just have cheese.
Exactly.
But it's high protein. That's the good thing about it,
Good for your bones, I keep telling myself.
Yeah, we have been to eat cheese.
What's your question, Kate?
I love that Shadows of Blue cheese. That's delicious.
I haven't tried that one. I've just tried a new one, and I've never been a big fan of goat's cheese, but my sister put me on this. It's Meredith marinated goat's cheese in a little jar, and it's absolutely fabulous. You do have to put that on something, but it's really good.
No, it goes really nicely crumbled over scrambled eggs. Delicious.
Try that. Thank you. Good suggestion.
My question is going to be, what would you tell your younger self from the perspective of now? What advice would you give to your younger self?
It's all going to be okay. Stop being so worried. It'll all be fine. Some things will go wrong. None of them will be the things you worried about going wrong. There'll be things you never even imagined. But mostly what you want, you'll get. What you hope for, you will find. And a lot of things will happen to you that are absolutely fantastic that you never dreamt of in your wildest imaginings. So calm down, relax, and enjoy yourself.
So what is one of the things that you always wanted that has happened?
To be a published writer, to write a novel and get it published, to be listened to have a voice that people listen to, those kinds of things. Also to feel like, because when I was young, I was very much the way I am now. So I had opinions and I felt that I had a right to express them. And I'm young in the 70s and 80s, remember, and that I had a right to be taken seriously. And young women still have an enormous problem with getting taken seriously. Young women are dismissed and trivialised and not listened to and seen as flippity-gibbets and sexual objects. And I mean, I was quite a pretty young girl. I had big brown eyes and quite big tits and a good figure. And so I couldn't get men, particularly, I couldn't really get anyone, but particularly I couldn't get men to listen to me and to take me seriously. And I found that very diminishing and depressing. And I wondered if there was something wrong with me. Like so many young people, I internalised that stuff and felt that it was my fault, that I hadn't found the key to unlocking people's ability to hear what I had to say, and that maybe my ideas weren't as good as I thought they were and all that kind of thing. And so I kept trying to remake myself, and I'd wake up in the middle of the night, after having had a glass or two of wine at a party and, really got animated about something I believed in strongly or some idea that I'd had. And I would wake, and I'd almost always get put down by whoever I was talking to about it. And I'd wake up in the middle of the night and berate myself for, don't talk so much, don't be so pushy, remember to ask them questions about themselves, give myself this terrible hard time about how I used to feel very strongly that I was too much. I was too big, I was too loud, I was too energetic, I was too enthusiastic, too everything. And I'm still all those things.
When did you realise it was the patriarchy?
Exactly, I didn't realise it was the patriarchy, and I would have called myself a feminist, and I definitely was one, but I didn't understand it in the same way, and I hadn't grown comfortable in my own skin. And I think to be young is to be insecure because you are untried and you are trying to find your way. So it, makes sense that young people don't feel as comfortable in their own skin as older people do. But now I don't have any of those issues. I know whose problem it is. And sometimes, it's my problem. Sometimes I've gone, thumping insensitively where I shouldn't have done. And if that's pointed out to me, hopefully I'm able to step back and think, oh, yeah, probably that wasn't the best way I could have possibly done it. But most of the time, no, it's not my problem. The issue, the hostility, the anger, the sense of lèse-majesty that some men seem to have when a woman challenges their opinion, is their problem, not mine. And so I'd love to say to my younger self, you're far too hard on yourself. You're really fine just the way you are. You don't need to improve or get better or change or be nicer or any of those things you're telling yourself. Just be yourself, and that's fine. And you're entitled to be yourself.
Was there a moment when that happened? Do you remember if there was a tipping point, or was that just a gradual sort of realization?
A bit of both. Mostly it was gradual. I ended up with a full-blown florid anxiety neurosis for about 10 years, which made me very unhappy. But it also sent me seeking help with all sorts of therapists and things, which was great because I learned an enormous amount about who I was in the world and how to interact with it, I'm sure, in ways I never would have if I hadn't done that. So that turned out to be a great gift. But what really started me understanding a lot more how to be in the world and feel comfortable about being in the world was, oddly enough, was when the greatest crisis happened to me when I had my first child when I was just nearly 31. I was 30 when I had my first child. And she was born prematurely and she fought a horrible infection in the hospital. It's still the biggest killer of babies under 1 to be premature babies. It's called RSV, positive bronchiolitis. And she ended up stopped breathing in my arms 3 times. We'd been in visit to hospital, but we'd been there a few days, and then she got really, really sick. And sorry, it's my phone going. I'll turn it off. And anyway, so I went through this appalling experience. She was rushed off to intensive care. She was tiny, she was 13 days old. She was rushed off to intensive care in what was then Camperdown Children's Hospital. She got the last available intensive care neonatal bed available in New South Wales. So she was officially the sickest baby in New South Wales. And I really thought she was going to die. But because I'd learnt through going to therapy that you reach out for help, I, through various means, got onto a grief counsellor at the hospital, and he met with me the next morning. He was a neonatologist and a grief counsellor, and he said 3 sentences to me that changed my life immediately. They helped me a lot in that crisis. But as my life went on, and to this day, they remain the core 3 sentences that inform my thinking, and they are: there's nothing special about you, and there's nothing special about Polly, that's my daughter. Terrible things can happen, and they can happen to anyone. Safety is an illusion, danger is reality. And so it sounds brutal, but it wasn't. It was wonderful, because it was like all these bricks fell off my shoulders, because I've been, driving myself crazy thinking about what I could have done, how did I cause this terrible thing to happen, etc., etc. And, of course, he helped me to realise I didn't do anything. That the question when terrible things happen to you is not why me. The question is why not me? And so, I was very lucky, very fortunate. She recovered, no ill effects. She's 32 now, 2 children of her own, turned out all right in the end. But at that point, I didn't know that it would. And there was no real reason to think that it would. And the thing about that was I realised that my anxiety and probably my internalising of how other people reacted to me was my futile attempts to try and control the uncontrollable. And that I realised that I couldn't control how other people reacted to me. I couldn't control what they thought about me. Waste of time. I now believe strongly, we're obsessed with outcomes in this society, but I believe strongly that you can't control outcomes. You can only control inputs. That's all you can control. The outcomes in the end take care of themselves, and sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't. If you control the inputs and do a really good job of that, you've got more chance of the outcomes turning out okay. Yeah. But they can still go pear-shaped even if you've done the best work of your life. That's just the truth of it. And this was a really dramatic way to learn that, I suppose, because I've been a very conscientious, pregnant woman. I've done everything. The inputs I've done well. The outcome was out of my hand. So this realisation that we drive ourselves crazy trying to control things we can't control, and learning what you can control and what you can't control is, as I discovered, the essence of sanity, but it's also the essence of self-confidence, because you give up wasting time, energy and effort on things that you're never going to have any impact on, and you put your time, energy and effort into the things that you can have an impact on and become much more effective by doing that. You also have a more balanced life because you're not wasting a whole lot of energy on shit that isn't going to do anything for anybody and probably is negative rather than positive. And you learn to accept yourself and your own failings, weaknesses and vulnerabilities and shrug your shoulders and not care what other people think, because you're not trying to control how they react to you. It stopped me being like public speaking is something people fear, which is an irrational fear. Jumping out of an aeroplane, on the other hand, people say I'm going to skydive to overcome my irrational fears. Well, that's just nonsense. Being afraid of an aeroplane is a rational fear. That's your fear. Being afraid of making a speech is an irrational fear. More bad will happen to you, except people might not like your speech. And that's a win-win, because if you're crap at public speaking, no one will ever ask you back, so you'll never ask again. But it stopped me being afraid of it, because I realised I can't control how the audience is going to respond to me. So I shan't try. I should just be myself, say what I think in a way that feels natural and authentic to me to speak. And if the audience likes it, that's great. If the audience doesn't like it, That's their issue, and they're right not to. They have a perfect right not to like what I have to say or how I say it. And that freed me up to just be myself.
That's really interesting, because my mum taught me that when I was a schoolgirl. She used to say, can you control it? And if I'd say no, she said, well, it's not your problem. You can't do anything about it. You just move on.
Let it go. And that is the true meaning of let it go. People don't understand what let it go means. It means go the shit you can't control and stop trying to control it. But we live in a control freak society, and people are asked in their jobs now to control things they can't control. And that absolutely drains the energy, the morale, and the life out of work. Workplaces are so much more miserable places than they were when I was young now. And it's because people are being asked to account for things they cannot control.
Hey, on workplace, I don't know whether you've seen online, Spain is just currently trialing a 4-day week. I saw that the other day. I'm like, frankly, the Spanish, they're always way ahead on working conditions anyway, because I don't know whether you've been for lunch whilst you're, sort of at work in Spain. It's 2 hours long. It's marvellous. Obviously they work later to compensate for it. It's just this concept of slowing down life, and that 4 days a week actually is enough to work, and 3 days off is perfectly reasonable. When did we lose that balance, do you think, of just this concept of just constant work, must always be online, must always be, sort of contributing to the bottom line, whatever one of those is?
I blame Americans.
A couple of things led to that. One was obviously technology, which enabled people to work much longer hours, and therefore it was sort of grabbed on. But there's something else too, which I think is an observation that comes out of my feminism, and that is the hours of work expected from people ramped up from basically the day that we started to think women might have a place in the workplace in career-oriented jobs rather than as supportive staff for men. And it was as if the men went, well, all right, we'll let you in, but Jesus Christ, girls, you're going to pay for it. We're going to make it really hard for you to juggle family and work. We're going to make it really, really tough. We might have to stay here longer than we used to, but, hey, we just missed out on the witching hour with our kids in bed. You're going to have to work all hours God sends. So we've ratcheted up the expectations of the workplace virtually at the same time that educated women started entering the workforce in large numbers. So I think that had quite a lot to do with it. It's, if you ever want to know why a behaviour continues, particularly an irrational seeming behaviour, follow the benefit. Who benefits from it? That's why it continues. Do they have the power? That's why it continues. So I think there was a lot of that. When we went to an online workplace, we also went to a time where somebody was always working all over the world. And if you've got corporations, then there's no such thing as a time when the office is closed down and people can't contact you. So there was a whole lot of things that kind of happened at once. And also we did stupid things like having open plan offices, which basically meant no one could get any actual work done.
I love open plan offices. So many people do.
I mean, when I first started work in the late 70s, you had an office and you worked in it. And when you wanted a break from work, you went to the cafe. By the time I was leaving, the corporate world in the early 2000s, mid-2000s, you went to the office and couldn't get any work done at all. And if you wanted to actually do any work, you went to the cafe because you actually got some peace and quiet, people left you alone. Or if you wanted to work with a colleague, you could actually work without everybody else being all around you doing what they were doing. So we created a situation where offices were no longer places where people could do any bloody work, which means everybody had to work out of hours. And I also think that this awful idea of accountability is a blame-oriented measure. It's a fear-oriented measure. Accountability is always someone must be held to account. Someone is to blame. So it plays into control freakism. It's all about outcomes, not inputs. And it terrifies people so that they're told, you're accountable for this. Well, they're not going to do anything new. They're not going to do anything different, and they're going to do a whole lot of busy work to look like, they're really putting an enormous amount of effort into it. So if it does go wrong, well, at least they tried really, really hard. If we could replace accountability, which is blame-oriented, with responsibility, which allows for human responses and change as the project evolves or whatever it is you're doing, and it allows you to respond well but it still not work out, then I think we would have a much happier workforce and we would do a lot better. And I'm with you on the 4-day week. I heard a wonderful radio program about in New Zealand, a company, and now a number of other companies that followed suit. They do a strict 4-day week, so people can arrange their hours any way they want to for the 4 days. So they could work 5 half days if they wanted to. It doesn't matter how they do it. But they are not allowed to work more than 4 days. That's however they spread it out. They can't work longer than that. And what they found was that productivity went right up. They actually got more productivity out of less hours. And I think for the last 30 years, we've been getting less and less productivity out of more and more hours. And that is an absolute nightmare for everybody.
I can bear that out because when we all went home with COVID, my team's productivity went up. And it's because they're not exhausted from travelling and stuff. And this week with all the rain, they all just said, we're going to work from home. And everyone went, sure. Because now we've got trust. Yeah. I already had trust in them, but the organisation now has trust that they will do their work.
See, accountability destroyed trust because people who were checking your accountability, making sure that you were being accountable, were riding you, and you were terrified that you weren't going to be accountable enough or whatever. So in the end, we all lost trust in ourselves and in one another, in our bosses, and it was a disaster. Harvard Business School has probably increased the world's misery exponentially over the last few decades, single-handedly.
Well, they have just pushed the fads. Nobody had to listen to them.
Well, they had that name, magic name Harvard, behind them. And unfortunately, we are easily conned by that shit.
We are, and I think, I can't remember which of the big investment banks, it's either Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs, it's one of them. They've just released literally overnight this report talking about how a lot of their analysts are saying, we knew that this wasn't going to be 9 till 5. We knew that. But we didn't expect the 9 and the 5 to literally be 9 a.m. to 5 a.m. the following day. And we knew that we'd have to pull a weekend shift every now and again, but it's every fucking weekend. And the CEO of the company's had to come out and say, all right, we're actually not going to make our teams work from Friday night until Monday. And you just sort of have to think, how did it get this ridiculous?
How did that seem okay to anybody?
Yeah, and when did it get to the point where they had to wait for a consulting company to come in and tell them, who probably, by the way, the consulting company ended up working ridiculous hours to give them the report, and it's just this never-ending flywheel.
Well, exactly, and part of it is neoliberalism, which basically says that we're all in this dog-eat-dog world, and if you're a loser, it's because you deserve to be, because you didn't work hard enough and you make the right choices and all that crap. So basically, we became a blame-oriented world. Neoliberalism is within its own kind of core a blame-oriented. It blames the poor for being poor, and it extols the rich for being rich, which is us about, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
And it made all of us terrified that we would be judged. In a way, that crazy, neurotic young woman that I was back in the 70s and 80s became the whole fucking world. Beating ourselves up all the time for not living up to
terrible this is.
Yeah, external expectations that we had no control over. So no wonder we're in the absolutely disastrous fix we're currently in.
So I've got one more question for her, and then I'll throw it over to Kate because I'm sure she's got a few. This is a complete move away from let's kind of be argumentative against the world, because I have one very important question. When you're doing your Jane drinks alone in a hotel bar,
yeah,
where do you sit? Do you have your own table, or do you sit at the bar in the hotel? Or do you not matter?
Generally, I sit at a table because I've got my iPad set up in front of me. And if I sit at the bar, somehow if you're a woman on your own and you sit at a bar, somebody is likely to come along and sit next to you and start to talk. And I don't want that necessarily. I have struck up conversations with people, and they've always been very charming, but by and large, that's not what I'm after. Whereas if you're at a table with an iPad, it does sort of say, people think you're working for a start because you have this ridiculous society, so that's fine. And yeah, I actually really enjoy that very sort of calm, relaxed, serendipitous, people dipping in and out of the conversation. We don't really talk about anything very serious or political. It's much more about, I don't know, it can be music, ambience, bars we like, wine we like, it's much more that kind of thing. And I really enjoy it. And I limit myself to 2 glasses of wine. That's all I ever had. And then I go up to the room and get room service. But I really, it's kind of become, I haven't done it for ages because, of course, with COVID, I haven't.
I know. Who's
traveling?
Yeah, I spent a little bit of time in a hotel recently. I can't recommend it right now. 14 days of hotel quarantine is not something I would do again, but...
Drinking alone in a hotel room.
That's exactly what I did, Jane. Now, I don't know whether you know this, but they limit you to 1 bottle of wine a day.
Oh, probably sensible, but yeah.
I know, I'm fairly certain that rule was tested to a limit, and they decided what...
I'm pretty sure that rule came about because of a bloke.
Yeah. Oh. I would guarantee that's true.
You're not allowed hard liquor. So, sorry, that's not true. You're not allowed a bottle of gin. They will limit you to 250 mils of gin every day.
Oh. But you can have a bottle of wine. Well, there you are.
I'm glad I sent you wine now, not gin.
No, me too. Thanks, Kate.
I actually have a question, because you've written and talked extensively about public education and been a great champion for public education. And how did that come about?
Well, I went to public schools from kindergarten to year 12, the local co-ed, nothing special, bog standard public schools. And I got an excellent education. And because I went to school, I suppose I started school in 1962, and finished school in 1974. Most people went to their local public schools. So the great thing about it was that they were really comprehensive schools. So they enrolled everyone in the community. They were very much the community hub. And it was what I, now looking back on it, think was a much healthier, saner, richer educational environment that most of our children get now, whatever kind of school they go to. Because what we've decided to do since then, which to my mind is bizarre, and all the stats would back me up, our educational ranking has fallen like a stone ever since we decided to do it, is divide our children up. So instead of putting them all in together and letting them work it out, we got all control freakish about it. And we started to put rich kids with rich kids, poor kids with poor kids, Catholic kids with Catholic kids, Jewish kids with Jewish kids, Muslim kids with Muslim kids, immigrant kids with immigrant kids, girls with girls, boys with boys, smart kids with smart kids, dumb kids with dumb, sporty kids with sporty. I mean, what possessed us? And then we started to decide that the best device to build a class system was via the education system, the very thing that was designed to destroy the class system. Australia perverted it, and we decided to start giving huge amounts of public money, and it was Prof Whitlam who did it, huge amounts of public money.
That's the most astonishing thing.
Yeah, fee charging schools. We did it as a political deal to get rid of the DLP and get back the Catholic vote. That's what we did it for. And it worked. The ALP got government, but it wasn't done for educational reasons, and it wasn't done for children. And what we've got now is a publicly subsidised arms race where aspirational parents, so-called, we used to call them social climbers in more sensible times, but now we call them aspirational. Send their child to the poshest school they can possibly afford. And those schools have to compete for that small pool of parents with that kind of money by offering ever more luxurious resources. So some kids are going to schools that are like palaces. I mean, they're just, Scots College is rebuilding the library so that it looks like a Scottish castle. So when I say they're like palaces, they're not actually lying here. Whereas we have other kids who are going to schools that haven't had a lick of paint or a bit of maintenance work since 1969, and they're crumbling. And we are totally okay with that. We rationalise it as being about social justice and parental choice and parents making sacrifices. And we seem to think that we should use educational funding to reward parents that we decided were self-sacrificing parents and punish parents that we decided, it's neoliberalism again, this idea of, what you get or don't get is entirely your own fault, even if it's simply you've got to be born out of the wrong womb. Silly, feckless child. How dare you expect to get anything to help you out? You were born to a, single mother with mental health and drug addiction issues. Well, that's your fault. You picked your womb, you better lie in it.
Better parents.
Exactly, should have picked better parents. It just makes me enraged because we love to talk about merit. We do nothing to help merit in this country. We do the exact opposite. We subsidise and endorse inherited advantage and inherited disadvantage. We entrench them through the education system and the way that we fund the education system. And most Australians, and I'm afraid a lot of left-wing Australians, are blind to this. And they're as blind to it and the damage that it does to our society as I think Americans are to the harm that unfettered gun ownership does to that society. We are literally creating a rule by a few, privileged, mostly private school boys. And look where that goes. Just look at what's going on in Parliament House right this minute. And at last, a few people are starting to draw the connection between promoting privilege as if somehow being born into wealth and good fortune makes you more deserving.
Well, that whole masturbating on the desk thing, that's very private school.
I'm sorry. Did you mean a single sex act? So seriously, call it what it is. A guy masturbated on a desk. It is not a solo sex act.
Or somebody else called it pleasuring himself.
Oh, really? Oh, how lovely. Have we got to the point of prudishness will not allow us to call out the fact that somebody broke, at the very least, a code of conduct? At best, it's possibly a breaking of some sort of indecency law. It's got to be.
In no other workplace would that be in any way acceptable. You'd be
probably was acceptable in the advertising agencies I worked in the 80s, but not anymore.
Well, look, I mean,
it wasn't acceptable.
I talked about that earlier, and there's a few of my friends who've worked in TV and production and advertising. They went, "Oh, yes, we still have stories." I mean, that's fair. That's fair. I'm not saying that. That was the other moment today where I literally had to turn the TV off when Scott Morrison did the whole people in glass houses moment. I'm like, dude, we wanted you to step up and lead and be accountable. That's not it.
No. Yeah. He is obsessed with, we might have done it, but he did it too. And you think, hello, we're back in the schoolboys' playground.
Mm-hmm. Now, that was where I was going to follow up with another question, because this happens in the UK as well. I'm not saying that Australia is unique in its problem, but if you look at who goes from public school into politics, it's almost a direct line. It's like you don't even pass go, you don't collect $200, you just get a pre-selection for an LNP seat. Now, somebody else also then sort of responded back and said, well, maybe we should start to value people who have broader life experiences becoming our senators and our MPs. And I'm like, well, that makes logical sense. But if you're a vaguely intelligent human being, why on earth would you put yourself through that? How do we get people like that to become politicians?
Well, we already had them. Emma Hussar, she was driven out.
Oh, that didn't go so well.
No.
Or Julia Banks. That's happened on both sides. And interestingly enough, they both have a very similar story. Emma Hussar won Lindsay, which helped the Labor Party win that election. Julia Banks won Bligh, I think was her seat, and helped Malcolm Turnbull win that election. Somehow we cannot forgive women who do a good job. They have to be crucified first and forced out. It's almost as if they did too well.
I go back to Gillard, though. I was really I had not realised how deep and wide the misogyny was in Australia until they basically destroyed Gillard's tenancy in the house. In the house, the way they attacked her really shocked me, and it made me realise that they, men and women, hate women.
Oh, they certainly hate women in power. There's something, but that's not. I think the really scary thing is that that's not Australian only. I mean, if you think about Trump and his victory over Hillary Clinton, that was whatever. And I mean, I happen to be an admirer of Hillary Clinton. I know a lot of people are not, but nevertheless, whatever you think about her, she was like 1,000 trillion miles more merit than Donald Trump has ever had or ever dreamed.
Merit.
And the Americans decided that they would rather have a gangster as president than an accomplished woman. This is misogyny writ absolutely in big black letters. And I was so interested in that I went away and researched and wrote a piece for the Saturday paper about the fact that, like, in the last 50 years, only 10% of countries have had a female head of state leader.
Mm-hmm.
So 90% haven't, and it's all been men. And only 10% have. Of that 10% of leaders who have been women in the last 50 years, fully 25% of them, that's 1/4, have been accused of corruption, investigated for corruption, or actually dismissed, so gotten rid of because of accusations of corruption, or jailed, actually jailed for corruption. Now, if you think about it, Hillary Clinton was endlessly investigated. Nothing was ever proved. The woman is either a criminal mastermind or innocent. Julia Gillard was investigated over the supposed slush fund at Gordon and Slater, remember, to do with a past boyfriend or something or other. Christine Lagarde was investigated and convicted of corruption. Julia, she was, I can't say the name, but she was the leader of Ukraine, was actually jailed for corruption. Then she was exonerated by the United Nations. Who else? A number of women in South America who have been investigated or jailed for corruption. All the men who led before and after them were acknowledged to be even more corrupt, but none of them lost their seat.
Were corrupt.
Yeah, it just constant, like even in Asia, I think in Thailand and in Taiwan, all the women always. And I came to the conclusion that we have a deep-seated idea that women who seek power are evil, that they are intrinsically untrustworthy, selfish bitches, and they're up to no good. And therefore, when any accusation is mounted against them, there is a tendency for us to go, I knew it.
Yeah.
And the reason we have to get women to go into politics is we've got to destroy that, or else we will never get a world that pays us the sort of money we need not to end up as poor. We'll never get safety in the workplace. We'll never be sure that our daughters can be safe from being prey, or that our sons won't be in workplaces that encourage them to be predators, which to my mind is worse. We will never change it. So we have to, first of all, stop internalising that it's our fault that we're not good enough. Stop buying into the bullshit of the blokes, which we've done for a very long time, and allow them to shame us. And do it anyway.
I mean, you've talked a lot about what women can do. What about what men can do?
Oh, there's so much that men can do. It's just none of them, or almost none of them do it. There's a number of simple things that men could do. If someone makes a sexist joke, call it out. Call it out. That's scary and so almost none of them do it. They mostly stand back and don't say anything and don't join in, and then they want you to tell them they're a good guy because they did.
They're an ally. They call themselves allies.
Yeah, I know. No, your allies do things. They don't just not do things.
It's the same as racism. So, a person of colour on Twitter the other day said, you can't say you're an anti-racist unless you've called out a racist in real life, in person.
Yep. You have to do it, and also you have to, there are other things, simple things, easy things that you have to do. Buy and read and pass to your male friends books written by women about women. Watch, go to and pay for the tickets to films written by, about women. Watch television series made about, by and for women. Take your son to films for little girls. Allow your son to adore Elsa and Anna from Frozen and let them dress up as Elsa and Anna if that's what they want to do, without a shadow of nervousness or embarrassment.
And let them paint their nails. Boys deserve nice nails too.
Yes, let them paint their nails, let them play around with makeup and pretty clothes and all those kinds of things. It won't make a damn difference to whether they want to sleep with guys or girls, And also, what does it matter if it does? But it won't. And don't make the feminine shameful, particularly to our children. You go into I've got 2 young grandchildren, so I noticed this. If you go into a clothing shop for children, and I look for something for my grandson Alfie, and all the shirts and T-shirts and jumpers in the boys section are really dull colours. But also, if they have any kind of thing on the front, they always have something. It's always predators. It's crocodiles, bears, foxes,
dinosaurs.
Gorillas, dinosaurs. If you go into the lions, you go into the girls' one, and first of all, they don't cover them properly. They're not sun safe. They've got little caps, and much lower cut here. What, for 2-year-olds? What are you talking about? And all the animals and things that they have on them are prey. Bunny rabbits, kittens, or they're butterflies. They're fantasy objects like unicorns. It's all, but the grooming begins from the very beginning, that women are weak and fluffy and men are there to eat them. Frankly, don't buy that shit and complain to the store. Say, do you realise that all the clothes that you have here for boys and girls are doing this and that? Maybe you can talk to your designers. There is so much. And if a man does it. I was out today talking about some friends about male allies, the ones we'd actually had do something in our lives. And I contrasted 2 men who I think would both call themselves allies, but only one really was. And it was when I was in advertising in the 80s and I was working at this very, hot shop agency, and it was all very competitive and all of that. And they were having a meeting and they were dressing the creative department down because we were difficult to work with. And then they said that I was the most difficult person to work with in the department. And that day I had heard another writer in the department, a man, say to one of the account service people who were making the complaint, don't argue with me, mate, you're just the monkey that carries the bags. Now, in my life, I've never said anything like that to another human being, and I never would. Yet he wasn't the most difficult person to work with. I was. And I was sitting there feeling, you can imagine, absolutely humiliated and gutted. Yes, I fought for my ideas and I thought they were good ones. Yes, I gave reasons as to why I thought they were the right solution. I thought that was my job. Apparently it's men's job, not women's job. I was meant to kowtow and say, yes, Jen, those are the 2 bags also. But one of the art directors, everyone really liked this guy, and he was a good friend of mine, suddenly stood up and said to my creative director, Jack, it's because she's a woman. That's why they say that. And the whole mood changed. Everybody in the room went, yeah, that's right. That's what happened. That's why they don't want women talking back to them. Had I tried to say that, had one of the other 2 women in the room tried to say it, we would have been eviscerated. That was an ally. That was a guy who took a risk, stuck his neck out and said the truth. And he's a very good mate of mine now, and he always will be. Another again, in advertising, being humiliated at a conference, I got up and I said that it was possible. It was a big discussion about could women combine being an advertising creative director with having children, and the one female creative director said it wasn't possible. And I got up and I said, I don't want the young women in this room to go away thinking that they have to make a choice that no man here has to make between having a family and having an interesting, demanding and successful job in advertising. I said, I've got children and I have had a successful career in advertising. And then one of the men on the stage said in front of everybody, all my peers, I don't know that we'd say you've had a successful career, Jane. Unbelievable. And it took me...
that's just rude. Like,
it's just hideous. I mean, it was also untrue. And this was from some fucking...
One of those moments where it's like internal voice. Even if you're thinking it, don't say it out loud.
He wanted to shut me up and it worked.
But it was privilege. It was a man speaking from a position of privilege.
I said something like, okay, fair enough, if that's your opinion. I'd learnt don't defend, don't justify. Fair enough, that's your opinion. I named another of other women in the room too, but there are these women and they've had it. So I sort of rescued myself, but I felt like shit. And I sat down and I got a note come through the audience from a guy saying, I so agree with you. My wife is going through this right now. It's so awful, blah, blah, blah. And I was furious. I went back and I said, don't tell me.
Could you not stand up?
And I wouldn't say this. And he didn't. That's not an ally. That doesn't help you.
So how about for the women out there, Jane? It's been a shitty week, whether you've been here in Australia watching the insanity of Parliament, whether it's my girlfriends back in the UK and that poor woman who was killed by a police officer, the people who are there to protect them. Just and there's misogyny, assault, and just domestic violence all over the world. How do we keep going? How do we keep the energy and not just go, you know what, I'm just going to burn it all to the ground?
Well, that could be an option if it gets to it.
Burning it all to the ground this week?
Yeah, this week, possibly. Maybe next. It's a bit wet this week.
That's a good point.
But no, I think the answer is this. I'm 63. I've been fighting this shit for as long as I can remember. And I have seen huge changes. But where I've seen the changes is women have changed beyond all recognition. When I was first fighting this fight, there were a few lone female voices, but most women backed away from us, didn't want to know, were still fully in the placate and protect a man, reflect them back at twice their natural size school of trying to get ahead in the world. That has really, really changed. Those women are now in minority, and women have they've gotten in touch with their anger, they've gotten in touch with their rights, they've gotten in touch with the fact that they have a perfect right to take up as much space as any man in every possible way. Women didn't believe that when I was young. They do now, and they are much more allied. Women are much more each other's friend than they were when I was young. We support one another much more, which isn't to say there aren't some women who don't and undermine you and all that kind of stuff. But the change is quite radical and astonishing, and that's wonderful. The group who haven't changed are men. And that's the next battle. Men must change. I do this illustration to try and show what's going on, in my view. Many years ago, my husband and I have been together 46 years, but we went through a period of difficulty and we went to marriage counselling. Thank you again, therapy, for telling me when you're in trouble, ask for help. It's always there. And I remember the therapist the relationships counsellor, drawing on a whiteboard, a big circle. She said every relationship has a finite amount of space. And what's been going on until now is that Ralph's taken up a lot of space and Jane's taken up a much smaller space. And she said, and that's very common in heterosexual relationships, particularly in the early years. She said, what's happening now is Jane wants to grow. She wants to take up more room. And there's two things that will happen. Ralph will make room and allow her to grow, which means he has to take up a little less space, which is hard. You've got to shrink. It's a little bit painful and uncomfortable. But if he does, you and he, Jane and Ralph, will have a much more rewarding relationship for both of them, because they will be two equals, two partners, fully working on a relationship that gives both of them enough room to be themselves. Now, what I think is going on now in the world is the relationship between men and women has a finite amount of space. And for 2,000 years, men have taken up almost all that space. Women have squeezed themselves in around the allowable edges. And women are now going, no, fuck you. We're going to grow, whether you like it or not. And some men are saying, right, well, then I'm leaving the relationship. You know, the incels, the MRAs, probably Scott Morrison, they're leaving the relationship or trying to. But a lot of men are starting to go, yeah, I could take up this space. I could make some more room. I could move over and make some more space for women. And if that happens, the world will change. Mm-hmm. And it will change so much for the better, because we will have a real partnership and a really much more equal world. I'm going to say totally equal, a much more equal world, and we'll both have room to be wholly ourselves. And that's my hope for the future. And so I don't think we need to burn it to the ground yet. We just need to be clear on what we're aiming for. And all we're aiming for is an equal amount of room to be ourselves.
And that is a perfect spot and a very optimistic note for us to draw to a close. Thank you so much, Jane. Lovely to see you again, Annie. Bye, everybody.
Thanks for having me.